Hi, ladies and gents, guys and gals. It's Miss Wilson here with Act 1, Scene 2. So again, this video is just sort of a guide. It's really for after you've done a reading of the story because we're not going to go through the whole scene. I'm just going to point out a couple important parts and try to help you with some of the discussion questions and study guide. So here we go. Act 1, Scene 2. As you can see, this part of the play is we're still in Athens. We haven't headed off into the woods yet. Don't worry, we will in the next act. We're in Quince's house, and so Quince, and you can see all the characters here, Quince, Snug, Bottom, Flute, Snout, and Starveling. And these are all their last names, excuse me. These are some of the tradesmen in town from Athens. And what they're doing in this scene is they're getting ready to practice for the first time a play that they're going to be putting on for the Duke and Duchess on their wedding day. And the play they choose to do is Pyramus and Thisbe. More about that in just a second. Your book does a better job than this online version of giving you what all of the roles are that they play or what all of their jobs are. It's not necessarily important that you remember exactly what each person was responsible for, but it is, or what their trade was, but it is important that you understand that they're tradesmen. And the reason being because oftentimes the tradesmen in Elizabethan England weren't overly educated, and you're going to see that show up here when our actors get into their different roles. All right, so Quince, Peter Quince is going to be our first character who speaks here. He's essentially the director, which is why they're at Quince's house. He's the one who's giving out all the parts in this scene and directing it. The other character we definitely want to make sure we pay attention to is Nick Bottom. And Bottom is an interesting character. He's going to be with us through the rest of the play, and he is a buffoon. So this scene is really the first time we get into the farce of the play, so that kind of very silly, exaggerated slapstick comedy. There's going to be some physicality to it, not so much in this scene, but you're going to see some of it, and sort of the ridiculous, and a lot of the humor here kind of comes from that. The other reason that I point out to you multiple times that they're tradesmen is that just like with the nurse, where you have that character who's not super overly educated, but still a good character, their moment of comic relief, a lot of it is going to rely upon malapropisms, so keep your eyes open for those. In fact, our first malapropism in the scene happens right here in Bottom's line. You were best to call them generally man by man. So generally, of course, means the whole group, and man by man meaning individually. So he contradicts himself in what he's saying there. It's best to call them generally, whole group, and man by man, individually. And so we have our first malapropism of the scene right there in Bottom's first line. Quince then starts handing out parts, and probably because he's as smart as he is, he starts with Bottom. And he's going to give Bottom the part of Pyramus. So the play that they've decided to do is Pyramus and Thisbe. And of course you see this contradiction here, the most lamentable comedy and most cruel death of Pyramus and Thisbe. So the story of Pyramus and Thisbe is going to sound really familiar to you since we just finished Romeo and Juliet. Pyramus and Thisbe are from two different families, and they're not supposed to be together, but they fall in love and they meet every night at a wall. And one night Pyramus shows up at the wall and finds Thisbe dead, and in seeing his lovely young lady dead, he kills himself, and then she wakes up and she finds him dead, and then she kills herself, and sounds familiar. Now, the humor in this is that of all the plays that they could perform for a wedding, they've decided to do this really tragic story of Pyramus and Thisbe. And it's sort of, some of the humor of that is how ridiculous this choice is. So of course he even says right here, the most lamentable comedy and most cruel death of Pyramus and Thisbe. So Shakespeare's already showing us that they really don't know what they're talking about. Anyway, a very good piece of work, I assure you. Now we're going to start giving out the parts, and Nick Bottom is going to play Pyramus. And notice right here, and this is one of the questions on your study guide, is what kind of actor or character is Bottom, and then what kind of actor does he think he is, and what kind of actor do you think he is? So let's look at his line here. What is Pyramus? A lover or a tyrant? A lover that kills himself, most gallant for love. That will ask the shedding of some tears in the true performing of it. If I do it, let the audience look to their eyes. I'll move storms, I will condole in some measure to the rest, yet my chief humor is for a tyrant. I could play Ericles rarely, or a part to tear a cat in, to make all split. The raging rocks and shivering shocks shall break the locks and prison gates of Phoebus' car, shall shine from far, and make and mar the foolish fates. These whole lines here, these lines right there, he's essentially making up his own rhyme, and it's very elementary, and it gets across that kind of elementary sort of not uneducated, but kind of new writer, new playwright type thing, because he's got these very short lines and they all rhyme, and you have the repeated alliteration here, raging rocks and shivering shocks shall break the lock, right? So we have the repeated rhyme, but we also have the alliteration in there, so it gets across this kind of ridiculousness. Bottom thinks he can essentially play any part, and so actually as Quince continues through the scene, Bottom tries to take every part. In the very next part, for example, to Francis Flute, he gives the part of Thisbe. Now, Flute, funny enough, wants Thisbe to be a knight because he doesn't want to play the female role. He tries to say that he has a beard coming in, so he can't play the female role. And Bottom says, I'll hide my face and let me play Thisbe too. And often in this line here, a monstrous little voice. Get the oxymoron there. But we also have this here, it's kind of exaggerated. Thisbe, ah, Pyramus, lover dear, thy Thisbe dear and lady dear. Right? He's trying to show that he could play both parts. He could be Pyramus and Thisbe. Wouldn't work, but he thinks it would. Anyway, Quince tries to stand his ground further. As we keep going through all the parts, the next kind of funny part here comes from Snug. Snug is going to play the lion, and as we go through performing other scenes with Snug, he is a very timid little lion, much like he almost reminds me of the lion from The Wizard of Oz, right? He just needs a heart. Anyway, poor little Snug, he's the joiner. You the lion's part, and I hope here is a play fitted. Have you the lion's part written? Pray you, if it be, give it me, for I am slow of study. You may do it extempore, which means without lines, for it's nothing but roaring, right? And Snug's afraid that he won't be able to remember to roar. So we have some humor in that part as well. But look who's back again. It's Bottom, and he's ready to play the lion's part too. He's just afraid he'll roar and roar and roar, and the Duke will say, roar again. They're like, no, you're going to scare the ladies. It'll be too real. I don't know that any of us are afraid that Bottom's lion would be too real, but they are. Anyway, so Bottom decides he will roar gently as a dove. You get the farce angle here. Everything in this scene and everything with these guys is sort of ridiculous. It's so silly and just kind of exaggerated and just over the top, but it's silly. It just makes you giggle, right? They're kind of these characters that just kind of make you happy. They just make you giggle at how silly they are and how concerned they are that like everyone's going to think that it's a real lion on the stage, and they'll get afraid, and then they'll all get hung because they brought a lion on the stage. I don't know if any of them are that good of an actor. In fact, I think even if you were that good of an actor, we could still probably tell that it was a man in lion's clothing. But regardless, they're afraid. It also, we get a little humor in here, this part, where Bottom is not sure what color beard he should wear in order to complete his costume. Like, he's not even so much concerned right now about the acting. He's got that. He wants to make sure that the costuming is going to be up to snuff. Anyway, what they decide to do is they are going to meet in the woods about a mile outside of town in order to practice their play. And so now as we end Act 1, or as we come to the end of Act 1, we have a lot of our most important characters are starting to head off into the woods. So remember from the end of Scene 1 that Hermia and Lysander are heading off into the woods. Helena is on her way to tell Demetrius. So Demetrius, presumably, we don't know this, but we presume or guess that he will probably head off after Hermia and Lysander. And now we have these actors that are also going to be heading into the woods. So we have some fun in store for us in Act 2. really, as we end here, this again is just kind of a fun, silly little scene. Sometimes critics look at this scene as sort of maybe Shakespeare having fun at the expense of perhaps some other actors or playwrights that he might know in Elizabethan England. But regardless of what it is, we can just enjoy the silliness and the comedy of this moment of farce here at the end of Act 1. So now here's your task. It's time to go to the big study guide. So I'll show you again. Remember that when you come to our website, we've got the videos up top. Soon I'll be adding Act 1, Scene 2, and our reading guides down here. These are really for use in class. Those are those important quotes that you want to make sure, or quote sheets that you want to make sure. And then down here at the bottom is the Midsummer Study Guide. Remember, all 5 acts are in that one document, so you only have to turn in a couple pages at a time. And what I would ask is that when we finish discussing an act in class, the next time your class meets, that's when it's due. So again, that's right here, this last one. All right. Thanks, guys. I hope these videos, you're finding them helpful. If you want to give me some suggestions in class for other things to include, let me know. I will see you soon.